over and say it. So what were you? Hey, everybody, welcome to Sorting Myself Out. I'm live here with my brother, Kohlton, and we are just going to chat for a little bit. We call it the Hostile Brothers because we are both at each other's throats, ready to rumble. Just kidding. We like each other, but we do fulfill the hostile brother archetype every so often. So what were you saying, Kohlton, before I started?
I was just saying when we did a podcast earlier, and you talked a lot about the shadow self and the soul, and I think this time we should focus on something that's a little bit more my area of expertise.
Something in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, something that I can that I don't have to scramble.
What he actually said was, "We're not talking about psychology this time. I can't. Hang. I can't hang.
I can't, man.
Well, it's not. We didn't. When did we talk about this? The shadow and the soul.
Last time we had a podcast, yeah.
Did we?
Mm-hmm.
Wow, that's interesting. Tell me more about that.
No, I won't actually. I think I'll move. I got something else to discuss with you.
So, but wait. But let me just say, ever since I made that video about Gabor Mate, I've been getting some interesting feedback. It's been definitely the most contentious comment section so far, which isn't saying a lot because our comments have been generally positive, but it's definitely making some people pretty upset, especially because I kind of came out against the Mate narrative about trauma and, well, specifically the argumentative fallacies that he was leveling against Peterson. But then other people took issue with my own personal beliefs on trauma. So I might clarify that sometime in this video.
It's not really a surprise to me that the people who view all their shortcomings as a result of trauma that will get offended when you tell them that might not necessarily be the case.
Well, here's the thing. Trauma's real. You know, trauma's a real thing. Obviously, I wasn't saying that it wasn't. Trauma is something that needs to be taken very seriously. Different people have varying degrees of trauma. You could make an argument that everybody has some level of trauma, just meaning some level of traumatization within their body and in their history that they haven't fully processed. I think that everybody might have some of that. But my argument was simply that we can't start generalizing based on that and blaming everything. Like, I don't like how Mate says addiction is caused by trauma. I don't think that that's true. There's a lot of evidence that shows that addiction is pretty much based on what you come into the world with. And then when the environment interacts with the natural proclivities that you have, you might get put in a situation where you're more likely to develop an addiction. But anyways,
well, my point is, and I'll be the bad guy here because this isn't exactly what you're saying, but I think if somebody has a victim mentality, they're going to want to put it on something,
right? And
if it's easiest to say, oh well, this happened to me in the past, and you know, this is a result. This is why everything in my life is going wrong, because some X, Y, and Z happened to me. And if only those things didn't happen to me, then my life would just be perfect.
Right.
And I think that's the kind of the fallacy people get into. And then if you even hint at saying, well, actually, maybe you should take some responsibility for your life and not necessarily just blame everything on your past and just try to move forward.
Right.
Because honestly, regardless on if it's caused by the trauma or not, it doesn't matter. You need to take on the responsibility.
Yes.
And when you say that to people who are in that victims, they're going to lash out and they're going to give you these emotional stories about their own situations. And it's hard not to be compassionate to them. But at the end of the day, I don't really think that it's valid all the time, honestly.
Yeah. Well, one of my best teachers, Roger Strachan, who's a doctor of psychology, and he's been working as a therapist for 50 years. I mean, he's in his 80s.
Mm-hmm.
He talks a lot about how when he was a kid, his stepfather just full fist hit him in the face and abused him all the time. And he talks about how he didn't get traumatized. He got pissed. And he didn't have any sort of feelings of poor me. He literally said he at times wanted to take revenge and kill him. And so it just goes to show that everybody responds to intense situations differently. And he says you can't get traumatized unless you're traumatizable. So if an event comes in that you're likely to view from a perspective of I've been imposed upon, then that makes sense. But trauma is really just a matter of somebody's personal ability to sequence through a set of events and emotions. So that's why I used war as an example. Some people go to war and it's super intense, but they process it. They process it fully, and they walk away from that experience without a huge level of PTSD. While other people that don't have the same factors of resilience, it's not good or bad, it just is what it is. Everybody's different. Jocko Willink talks about this. They can't handle the same amount of intensity. So it just goes to show that we all handle things differently. One of our commenters says trauma causes a victim mentality, which is kind of what you're saying.
Well, this kind of interesting. You're kind of leading into a genetic argument, and I think it's a really good argument to make from that angle.
It is a genetic argument.
I think I'd probably support it. The thing about Jocko, and I've been listening to him a lot recently. He obviously has a lot of experience in those situations. So because he was a Navy SEAL commander, and when you look at it, it's like you can make yourself out to be a victim based on your trauma if that's what you choose. And that's kind of the way I want to look at it. And I guess that might be where I deter from like a total genetic argument, because I still think at some level you do have the free will to choose whether or not you want to be a victim. And maybe some people are more predisposed to the victim gene than others. But the thing is I still think you have a choice, and it's important that you have a choice. I think without the choice, then I think
I agree.
It's kind of meaningless. It's easy to give into despair.
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. All that I would alter slightly is that being victimized and acting like a victim are two different things. So you can experience something really intense without acting like a victim. And you could even have trauma. I know a lot of people who have PTSD that they still have like an intense, like they'll shake or they'll have a panic attack, but they don't talk to themselves like a victim. They say, okay, like I got to deal with this situation that's happening in my nervous system. So it's like experiencing trauma doesn't make you, that you can't say that if somebody experiences trauma, they somehow have a poor mentality. That would be wrong. What you can say is the mentality that they do have is important, but that doesn't change necessarily the intensity of their experience. It will help get out of the situation though. So
it's kind of interesting. I mean, PTSD is an interesting thing to speak about, because it's obviously one of the most high intensive forms of like recalling trauma, right? Is to have PTSD. Yeah. And and it's such a fascinating thing. I think even as a psychologist, I think it'd be interesting to study. In World War I, they had no conception of what it was, what PTSD was. And, they put these soldiers in the trenches and basically used them as cannon fodder for 4 years. And they just, every 3 seconds would just be like this, like a boom, artillery shot, boom, artillery shot. And you never knew if the next one was going to hit you and you'd be dead. And like that constant loud noise in the background gave them something they called shell shock, which is what we know as PTSD today. But before that, nobody even knew what PTSD was really. Right. And so they started bringing them back to hospitals in England, and they started using like electrotherapy to try to cure them, because people would be like shaking and having these panic attacks from, dealing with all the mortar fire. And it's interesting, like, and obviously the electrotherapy was awful. And eventually in the next war, the name changed to something else. And then eventually the name changed to something else. And now we have it called PTSD. But the way people responded to it, it's kind of an interesting thing to note. It's almost as if it kind of PTSD became created after modern warfare. But when you look back, I can't imagine that somebody during the Crusades or somebody during the French Revolution wouldn't have PTSD. I just don't know if it was as standardized. Once it became standardized in such a global war, maybe that's the only way they could actually diagnose it and start to figure out what was going on.
Yeah, that's a good point. Somebody wrote in a comment here, says, if everybody could just choose not to have trauma, nobody would choose to do it. It must be because then it must be because they are too, quote unquote, weak in some sense and are overwhelmed by the experience. Yeah, the thing is, that's a good point, and I don't think using the word weak is even right, because everybody has different factors of resilience, and I might be traumatized by one situation, but not traumatized by another. So I might be stronger than someone in some sense, but weaker than them in another. So it's all relative based on the unique personality faculties.
Well, I wasn't necessarily saying that people could choose not to have trauma. I was saying that you can choose to make yourself a victim of it. I don't know if he's saying that, if he's trying to say that's what I was saying. I wasn't saying that. I was saying obviously everybody has trauma, and some people have more than others. But it's a matter of how you respond to it, not a matter of just saying, oh, I have trauma, now I'm deciding that I don't have trauma. Well, that's not it. It's a matter of how you deal with the trauma. Like you said, some people come back from war completely different than other people. But
I would argue that that's not just because they had a better attitude. I would say that that's probably mostly because they're temperamentally different people and they have different tolerance thresholds. So Griswold,
that's a good point. But I also do think at some level it comes down to choice, even if the genetics have a great factor in it.
I think you're right. I think choice is very important, and everybody has a creative choice about how they want to deal with their life circumstances. And if I have a certain emotion, I'm responsible for dealing with that emotion and not blaming it on others. That's why I came after the trauma crew a little bit in my last video, because where it gets taken to this radical point where it says, oh, if you have trauma, therefore everything is society's fault. Everybody has trauma. Therefore, everything's a product of social constructionism. Therefore, nothing's innate or inherent about us. And everything at the end of the day is a problem of capitalism. And we should be more tolerant and compassionate and this and that, which is not bad messages, but it's just a fundamentally flawed argument.
Well, I don't think those people are actually, those people, I guess you could call them social justice, whatever you want to call them. They're not really, they're kind of living in their own reality. And with the confirmation bias that goes on in today's world, where, I can see it on my own YouTube recommended, honestly, because I'm a, not that this is going to get political, but I'm like a liberal person, and I have some traditional values and some non-traditional values, but because I click on, I've been clicking on a lot of stuff regarding Jordan Peterson. I've been watching some stuff on Ben Shapiro and some other. And I wouldn't even think I agree with all those people on everything. I agree with Jordan on a lot, but Ben Shapiro is a hit or miss with me. And now I'm getting, then all of a sudden now there's Trump videos in my recommended, and it's funny because at the same time, I still have some other recommended videos that are anti-Trump, and you can't tell just by the comments of one video, like what the public actually thinks. Because if you click on one video that says, Trump gives a speech about MAGA hat kids or something, right? And if it's by Fox News, you click on it, all the comments are supporting Trump. They're like, oh, thank God he said this. And if you look at like another thing, like from Now This or CNN, you click on it, same exact speech, different headline, maybe it'll say something slightly different. You look at all the comments, they're overwhelmingly negative. Now, when I click on that video, the algorithm changes, and now it's only going to give me more stuff based on that. And so when you're living in your own little pocket bubble of YouTube and the internet, you think everybody just agrees with your common sense points. But the truth is there's the internet separating. It's not helping the divisiveness, because nobody goes to the places where their enemies are on the internet. They just stay in their own little confirmation bias bubble. And it only inflates their opinions.
If they do go where their enemies are, they typically try to find a reason to discredit them immediately. Like some of the people who commented on my last video, who were seemingly Gabor Mate fans, really didn't like it. Griswold Grimm says, people like to think if they had trauma, they'd be able to choose their way out of it. Yeah. And you also say PTSD these days is reintegrating into the passive herd shopping mentality after seeing how the real world is. And then Boy Meets Wart says, trauma is not something you can really control, but resilience does seem to have something to do with making a choice about how you interpret it. All right. All great points. Thank you all for commenting. But yeah, it seems to me that we're definitely creating these echo chambers online, and we're not dealing with the same facts. We all have different sources of information for how we view reality. What's true to me is now different than what's true to you. We don't agree on the empirical data. And so we're fundamentally talking from two different universes, and it's just an extremely difficult situation. So
yeah.
Somebody commented this Kohlton guy is epic. I agree.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know who commented that.
So
I want to get back to the Mate video. Is that how you say his name?
Gabor Mate, I believe.
Mate.
I think.
I was watching your video, and I didn't get to watch the original source, so maybe I don't have the right to comment on it just based on your video. But I kind of had a bone to pick with you about something you said, if you want to get into that.
Sure.
Since we're on the topic of Mate. So I think you said something about his response and him comparing all these ideologies to religious ideologies, and you said that was kind of a fallacy, although he had some points with some terrible atrocities committed by the Christians, such as the Crusades. And it's kind of interesting. I actually study a lot about the Crusades, and I'm a history major in school, but I don't have a degree, so I'm not qualified to do anything other than give my opinion, honestly. But based on my studies,
you have to have a degree to be qualified.
Well, I mean, I'm not going to try to be a professor on here.
I understand. No, I'm just
honestly, there's a million armchair historians out there that'll disagree with everything I say if I don't state it like this. But when it's interesting. So the Crusades is like a very hot topic issue even today, and you see there's a lot of tensions nowadays between Christians and Muslims, and that goes back all the way to the Crusades. And it's been kind of politicized by the left, mostly I'd say the left and the right, honestly, into like something that we can look at today and say, okay, we can blame this religion for this, when really it's not that simple. And everybody, I saw this video by Stephen Crowder, and he has some good content, but I think he's a little bit too abrasive for my liking, and I don't think he actually changes many minds as he think he would, but due to his abrasiveness. But he made this 10-minute clip, kind of like a clickbait video, called "Why the Left's Wrong About the Crusades" or something like that. And I watched it, and even with my non-expert knowledge of the Crusades, kind of me just studying it and being a fan of that part of history, I could just tell how kind of politicized it was.
Right.
And the video was trying to expose, going back to the confirmation bias, it was trying to expose how the left was mischaracterizing Crusades. And then he went and did it the same way on the right. Like, he's like, this is why you're wrong about the Crusades for thinking about it this way. And now I'm going to think about it the exact same way from my point of view on the right. It's kind of interesting, because I left this long comment talking about, how the truth really lies in between with the Crusades, and how the Christians or the Muslims weren't really correct, and that both of them were committing terrible atrocities. So I left this, this page comment, and I was like, okay, probably like 3 people will read this, but I just wrote it because I was kind of mad that he was being so ignorant about the history. And then all of a sudden in a week it had like 500 upvotes or something. And the next week it was like 800. And then all of a sudden, and there was some good responses to it, there's some counter responses, but most people agreed that Crowder kind of, just used his right-wing agenda to make the Crusades what he wanted it to be. And then all of a sudden the comment got deleted. And the only one could have deleted it is the YouTube account. Because I know YouTube wouldn't come and delete my comment trying to tell a conservative that he's wrong about about something. So I was kind of concerned, because it's interesting. We have a lot of these figures nowadays that are just advocating for free speech, and he's one of them apparently. And then to just delete my comment because I called him out for being ignorant with his video is kind of interesting. But to tie this all back in, not to digress, your comment was something about how Mate has a point if he does mention something about the Crusades, does he mention something about the Crusades?
Well, no, he doesn't say Crusades. He says, do I need to tell Jordan Peterson how many people were slaughtered in the name of the gentle Jesus? I mean, come on. Why is he picking one ideology but not looking at religious ideologies that are just as murderous and dangerous? That's what he said.
And I think this is like a poor man's Sam Harris argument, which is kind of interesting.
A poor man's Sam Harris.
Because he's trying. Because Sam Harris does that all the time, and I think Peterson kind of got him in the debate. Even though I think those were amazing debates, and I don't really think there's a winner for those debates because they were honestly just two great intellectuals having a discussion. But the point Sam could never get past Jordan. He never made a convincing argument to me, as somebody who's previously an atheist, is that, and somebody that doesn't really practice religion regularly, it's like you can't get past the fact that these stories have intrinsic value to people, and that you can't just cast them away. And Sam never really had a strong argument for that. And what he tried to do, which I didn't consider a strong argument, was bring up things such as the Crusades, saying, "Oh well, look at this, look at that, look at how many bad things religions have done." And I think I'm starting to get a feeling that there's a difference between being religious and being within an ideology like fabricated as religion. Mm-hmm. To me, the Catholic Church, in a lot of ways, maybe not today, for a long time, the Catholic Church was an ideology masked by religion. A lot of times they wouldn't even read the Bible because the only people who could read were the priests. So they would just say whatever they want, say, "Oh, it came from the Bible." Right. And you're illiterate. You can't read the Bible, so you just have to trust the priest. Oh, the priest says that the Bible says you need to give the church money, when it doesn't. Now I'm going to give the church money, right? So it kind of diluted. And I'm not saying that the Catholic Church is all bad, because obviously it's done a lot of good things for people in the world. Sure. And you know, if you want to read more critiques about the Catholic Church, you should read 95 Theses by Martin Luther and the whole Protestant Reformation. It's a whole different discussion. But there's certain ways that people can use a religion and then form an ideology that sort of allows them to manipulate people and to take advantage of people. But that's not the religion to me, as somebody who believes that you can interpret the religious text and implement it in the life you want. If you want to use a church, it's fine. I fundamentally disagree with that. And you can even use an example such as Crusades to make my point, honestly, because the Crusades were all founded on the idea of rescuing the Byzantine Empire, in theory, from rescuing the Byzantine Empire from destruction from the Seljuk Turks that were invading Byzantium. And Byzantine Empire, was the eastern half of the Roman Empire after the western half had already fell. So it was the remnants of the Roman Empire. It was actually a great empire. But after the rise of Islam, they slowly started eating away at their lands in Turkey, and eventually the Byzantine Empire fell. But before it fell, the Orthodox, non-Catholic Byzantines called out for help to the rest of Europe, saying, "Please help us. We're going to be invaded by the Muslims. And then if we're invaded, you're next." Okay. And so Pope Urban II, I promise this is going to bring it all into context. He went out and basically went to France and started this speech that started the whole entire series of the next 9 Crusades, and basically said, we need to defend our Christian brethren from this destruction, and he used a bunch of vile examples of the Seljuks, beheading children and torturing Christians and keeping them as slaves. And some of the stories were probably true, and some of them were probably, over-exemplified and a little bit exaggerated. And he used that as a way to gain political power in Europe, because I suspect Pope Urban II never really cared about Byzantium or not. I think what he did is he cared about solidifying his own power, because before that, the Pope was simply a religious figure. And now Europe, which is a place where all these countries were fighting over land and territory and hated each other, are now unified under one leader, the Pope, under the Christian cause. So now you have a bunch of knights from all over Europe who would be fighting each other for their lord's lands, going together on crusade to stop this common enemy. And on the way, on the way, they committed atrocities as well. So that's why you can't really say that, you know, the modern right-wing side is that the Crusades need to happen because we needed to rescue Byzantium, and if we didn't do it, then it would have been all for naught. And the left-wing side is saying, well, but look at what they did to all the Muslims. They, you know, they tortured them and they killed them. And you know, another good point on the left-wing side is that the Christians often on their way out of Europe would go into Jewish communities in the year 1000, and they would massacre the Jewish communities in Europe before going on the Crusades. So there's tons of religious spewed violence happening during the Crusades on both sides. So you can't really politicize the argument because, you know, whatever one side was doing was spurred by the other side. They fed into each other. And it's just, I just think it's interesting because I don't really view that as religion, because the religious text, the Bible says, thou shalt not kill. Then the Pope wasn't preaching from the Bible. He said, if you go on crusade, and the reason why people did it, you'll be absolved of all your sins. So now all these criminals and these knights who had been killing people and felt like it was a burden on their soul because they knew that killing was a sin, were told, if you kill an infidel, it's not murder. It's the path to heaven, which is a quote from one of my favorite movies, Kingdom of Heaven, which is basically what they thought. If the Pope could absolve you of your sins and you could be brought into heaven. And that's one of the reasons that I don't believe the Catholic Church at the time was actually a religion. It was an ideology with the backbone of religion. It was guised as religion. And I think in a lot of ways there's still religions like that today. But don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, which is something that Jordan Peterson, I think, says a lot. It's an important note.
Wow, those are all really good points. The one point that I heard you say that I might disagree with a little bit is how you talked about the Bible doesn't say that we should go kill people, but we're talking about this in comparison to Gabor Mate's argument against Jordan Peterson about how he doesn't criticize religion enough, and you can't find anywhere that I've seen that I'm aware of in the Communist Manifesto where it says, you know, Marxists should go murder people. So there's a hole in your argument just there, but everything else you said seems to check out from my perspective.
I'll make a rebuttal. I've read the Communist Manifesto, and at one time I considered myself a socialist, and I've gone a long ways since then. I was about 12 years old, so I give myself a little grace. But I've read the Communist Manifesto even more recently, and it's interesting. It doesn't. The Communist Manifesto, as I remember, doesn't say go kill these people, but it does mention radical revolution and something a lot more intrinsically violent than anything you'll really find in the Bible. And a large scale uprising is a little different than, you know, stone your neighbor if he kills your cattle, right? it's a little bit less intrinsically violent. And the issue, and I've been studying a lot of why the communist revolutions happened in Russia, and, you know, a lot of stuff that Peterson talked about with the Gulag Archipelago, which I'm going to read pretty shortly, and he does a great podcast with Jocko Willink about it. Just thinking about like how much envy and hate was spurred by this, that I don't think is spurred by fundamental religious people. I don't think it's necessarily intrinsically spurred. I think it can be altered, but it's different. And when you look at an ideology such as communism, and you look at a religion such as the Judeo-Christian tradition or just Christianity, let's say, it's so much easier to boil communism down into just like three things. With the Bible, it's like so vast and so important, has so many different stories to tell that you can't do that. And that makes it harder for me to be convinced of an ideology replacing religion. And of course, we all know what happens when we replace religion with ideology. I mean, we got 100 million dead bodies in Europe stacked up to prove what went wrong when people decided to be secular, abandon religion completely, and say, we're going to replace this in our lives. Because it's obvious that people want something to go after. It's obvious that people can't just be true atheists where they just don't believe in anything. Like people have a mob mentality and they start to follow something. So when the religion left, they started to follow something a lot less meaningful and a lot more dangerous, which led to, I mean, the biggest catastrophe in all of human history, you know?
Yeah, that's a good point. We got a couple more comments coming in here. Keep an eye on Alexander Duggan. He might be a contrast to JBP. Alexander Duggan. I've never Duggan.
No,
I've never heard of him. Interesting.
No, I haven't.
And then another comment. Yes, the rational mind can't get around it. Get the upper hand over the religion. It can't be understood in total. Yeah. So. Yeah, that's a really good point. It does seem that when we take away our mythological substructures, we just inevitably replace them with a new dogma, whether it be scientism, or just science, or whether it be political radicalization, like radical leftism, radical right wing. So it just seems that if we don't have some sort of mythological belief system that where we can just where we can live out some of our fantasies as human beings, then we just inevitably regress to these more tribal roots in our genetics, would be my argument.
I'm not necessarily convinced that the modern atheist movement has a reasonable alternative to religion, because it's obvious people are going to follow something. And what do you want that thing to be? You want it to be something that's, the name of it is to be anti-religious, to be anti-believing in something. That's what you want it to be founded on, something that's against believing in something. That's not going to work. People are going to find something else.
Right.
And pure science, I mean, pure science makes sense to an empirical, rational mind until you personally experience something spiritual that you can't explain. Until you connect with something deeper that science can't explain, and it only goes so far. We have so many questions. I mean, I can just name one huge question that kind of poses a brilliant question with regards to God and atheism is consciousness. We don't know what consciousness is. We're not even close to understanding consciousness. Could that be the implementation of God? Is God consciousness? I don't know. It's something to consider. But when you just say, nope, I'm only going science, only doing what rational thought, and I'm not going to believe any of that mumbo jumbo because the Crusades happened 1,000 years ago, and because 9/11. It's like, I'm sorry, but people take advantage of every system. So it's not like you can just strawman it with a few events. And what atheists like to do now is strawman Christianity by looking at fundamentalists. It's like any 10-year-old atheist can dissect fundamentalism. And the majority of Christians aren't fundamentalists.
Yeah,
they know the world wasn't made in 7 days, and they know that the earth isn't 3,000 years old, right? So I think if there's an atheist movement that didn't result to strawmanning fundamentalism and could provide something as meaningful as the Bible, and not only as meaningful, but something better, then people could get on board. But they're not going to do that, and that's not going to happen. Yeah. So I don't really get the critique, honestly.
Yeah, it definitely doesn't check out when I hear it from your perspective. Somebody just tuned in and said, why are these brothers hostile to each other? The reason we call this the Hostile Brothers, we're gonna do a series of live streams and podcasts called the Hostile Brothers. So anytime we write Hostile Brothers, it's Kohlton and I who are brothers. And there's this archetypal motif, Cain and Abel, Loki and Thor, of the hostile brothers. And actually, we tend to play into that a little bit. And we've actually become very close as friends, but we've experienced a tremendous amount of conflict between each other and have wanted to kill each other literally at times. So actually, I think the last time we wanted to kill each other was
I don't know if I think it's been about 10 years since I wanted to murder you, but maybe for about 10 whole seconds.
I was ready. I not literally wanted to kill you, but we definitely have wanted to hurt each other even last summer. So there is this kind of theme, but we've really done a lot of work to get over that. And now I consider you one of my best friends, which is really cool. But we still might want to,
I was actually sharing our relationship with a friend of mine, he's like, "Oh, how's your relationship with your brother?" And I said, it's kind of interesting. I think me and him are kind of stuck in a place about 10 years ago, some point when we get frustrated at each other, where he sees me as the annoying 10-year-old brat that won't leave him alone. And I see him as like the tyrannical overlord that wouldn't let me hang out with his friends. And so I think sometimes we kind of get stuck in that mentality and we kind of go chimpanzee mode, but it's different because we actually don't have anything to fight about, really. So I think the only time that we actually do fight is when we kind of lose sight of who we are as people now.
Yeah.
Because we get distracted about the past.
Yeah.
I'd say.
Yeah. Well, and to be fair, you're kind of an asshole. So I'm just kidding.
I mean, that's not even a joke. That's just valid. So
yeah.
It's
somebody asked, is the reason that we're getting along better now partly because of Jordan B. Peterson? And I would say yes. Would you?
No.
You don't think so?
Not personally. I mean,
because I think that for me,
okay, go ahead.
Well, for me at least, just his teachings on understanding resentment and bitterness and trying to get the best out of your relationships and trying to figure out what it is that the other person wants and what it is that you want and how to make compromises. I feel like we kind of did that over the last year or so in kind of navigating our struggles.
Yeah, and I would give him some credit because he's influenced my entire life. So if something's changed in my life over the last couple of years, it's hard to say that he hasn't had a part in it because he's changed my whole substructure of thinking. But I think, honestly, we do so many things as a family, as weird, programs, whether it's tracker school and stuff like that, that there's not to say it's weird, but not conventional, I'd say, that it's definitely, it could be attributed to a lot of things as well as us just growing up and maturing.
I would also say that Jordan Peterson has given us something to bond over because we talk about him all the time. We talk about all the videos that he puts out. We talk about his ideas. We debate about things. It's something that we can do together. It's like an activity, like being a fan of a sports team or something. We go see that team play and we root for that team. And so it gives us something kind of to unify under.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the powerful things about having everybody talks about the dangers of tribalism, but one of the powerful things about tribalism is it gives everybody something to bond over. And so we're deeply rooted to, organize into groups and attach to certain ideas. And you could even see in the comment section of the video I posted rebuttaling Gabor Mate, where the tribalism started kicking in. Yeah, Gabor Mate is crazy, or hey, screw you, Jordan Peterson's a quack. And you can see how there was increased bonding and oxytocin being released in our brains, bonding over how we were defending Jordan Peterson. And you can see the other group, how they were feeling extremely defensive and aggressive. So there's extreme dangers to it because it's ultimately toxic to get into tribalized mentalities. But we also have to view it from this point of bonding and group cohesion.
Well, the biggest example of tribalism that is expressed by mostly males is, like you said, sports. I mean, there's no real rational reason why I'm waking up at 2 a.m. tonight to watch the Colorado Avalanche game while I'm in Italy. There's no reason. It's just a game. It doesn't affect my life other than me being invested in it, and I can't quite explain why I'm invested in it. It's just a matter of that tribalism, like you were saying, and it's something that I don't think we can fight. It's something that we have to be aware of and express healthily,
right? Because
it certainly exists, and it's going to come out in religion. It's going to come out in ideology. It's going to come out everywhere, and we just have to be aware of it. And that's like you can go back to the Crusades. That was tribalism.
Yes. Well, we're all
tribalism.
We're both big ice hockey fans, so we go watch the Colorado Avalanche play. And when we're at the Pepsi Center in Denver, you know how the crowd gets all pumped up when they start to go after a certain player, start fighting.
Yeah.
Okay, in that moment.
Yeah, I mean, like PK Subban in last playoffs. Yeah,
it's so intense. Literally, people, like, you can feel the energy in the whole arena. People, when there's a fight breaking out, people literally want that other person to hurt. And it's like such a primal feeling. Like, I could feel it in my body, like, Wah! And I just want to go, get him, kill him, you know. And I'm like, whoa, why am I? But when you realize that it's a biological instinct that you're going us versus them, and it feels good because the dopamine centers in your brain are being activated, and you're like, oh my God, like, this is amazing. So you get this big rush. But when you look at it from a prefrontal cortex intellectual place, you say, oh my God, that's scary. I'm literally in this moment standing in an arena of people with a group mentality cheering for someone else to get hurt. And then you can start to see why the gladiators were such a powerful thing. And you happen to be in Europe right now, and you were just recently in I was just about to mention
this. So yeah, I mean, we think we're so different and civilized now, but when you walk into the Colosseum in Rome, there's no difference to me into that and to going and watching a movie about going and watching the movie Gladiator could express the same emotions, maybe on a lower level, than going to the actual Colosseum.
Right.
And it's because we just like watching it. There's some part of our brain that likes watching murder and likes watching this tribal events, and that's what sports are. It's two teams colliding with one each other, and
right.
And it's all based on who's better, right? Because when you say that there's no better team, then it's not fun for anybody, right? Nobody would watch that.
Yeah.
If there's no winner, and that's what the issue is with, you know, what people are trying to do to kids nowadays with their sports.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy, man. And I think instead of denying those instincts for tribalism and aggression and superiority, I think if we embrace them and are aware of them, just like when I'm in the hockey arena and I notice that I'm starting to want somebody else to get hurt, I can be like, whoa, I don't really want that person to, like, from a more altruistic place to get hurt. It's just that I'm in this rush right now. And,
yeah.
And you see the dangers that can lead to. Like, for example, in communist Russia or in Nazi Germany, when people get into this tribe mentality, and then all of a sudden you turn other people into a them, and then we're an us, and then it becomes like this rush to, like, get rid of the them, like pound them out, like get them down.
And I'd say that religion actually is a good counter to that, a good natural counter to that.
Yes.
If expressed properly. I mean, you can tell throughout the New Testament with Jesus, you know, love your neighbor and love thy neighbor, and, you know, cherish the poor and things like that. And that's something that it's like saying that we're all intrinsically human. And that's what led to ultimately individualistic thinking, which allows us to identify that tribalism. Because if we didn't have individualistic thinking, we wouldn't be able to identify that we are tribal, and that not only are we tribal, we're individual. And that just because we're tribal doesn't mean that we need to start collectivizing everybody.
Yeah, somebody just actually posted, the individualism Jordan B. Peterson preaches is an evolutionary dead end. A bunch of loose individuals will not be able to compete with a tribalist collective in the long run. Interesting point. Nolan, somebody who's been on our podcast before, awesome guy, says, I'm hoping Colorado doesn't win another game. If they do, the Oilers can't make the playoffs. So, yeah, man. Well, I'm glad you're happy.
The Oilers are done, buddy. You got to get over it. They're finished.
So, what would you say in response to this individualism is a dead end?
Yeah, I actually have a response to that. So I don't think individualism is dead end, and I think that you're confusing tribalism with collectivism. Tribalism is not collectivism. Tribalism is identifying yourself with other individuals you're associated with. Collectivism is saying people based on a certain trait are this way, and I'm going to antagonize those people. It's different. It's based on something that they can't necessarily control. Whereas being in a tribe is made up of individuals, usually who choose to be in that tribe or are born into that tribe in a familiar way, in a familial way. And that's not necessarily collectivism, as although it can leak into collectivism with these big family feuds that you see. But I think it's completely different, and I don't think individualism is in any way a dead end. I mean, if any way, it's limitless what you can do as an individual, and that doesn't mean that there isn't room for being in some sort of collective to work to obtain a goal. That's how we establish civilization. The issue is that along with having a souled collectivist mentality, all the oppression and all the bad things that have happened have been a result of that.
That's a really good distinction to make. The same person says pretty much only white Europeans are for this fetish of individualism that has manifested themselves. Yeah, you're losing. Definitely losing. You're losing.
I don't know what these people are talking about. I don't follow you, potato.
The question is Kemshaw says the question is how deep of a concept do we need to share in order to not become too individual and lose from each other, and should we make it in the state make it great again, for instance?
Can I respond to this one?
Sure.
Okay. Me and my dad have a big argument about this. Me and my girlfriend have a big argument about this, and I'm on the side that is more difficult as of late to defend. And as far as believing in the state, yes, I think you absolutely need to believe in the state. And I think actually nationalism to some degree is necessary for the state. Without nationalism, we wouldn't be able to have wealth. We wouldn't be able to prosper as a society, because people need to believe that people need to believe in themselves as a people. It enabled to go forth and create something in the universe. But obviously, it can get over bloated. I mean, the easiest example, which everybody will point to, is Nazi Germany, and that was National Socialism, and that was a nationalist movement, and paired with imperialism, not necessarily imperialism, I guess you could call it imperialism, paired with militarism, and paired with racist ideology. Now, it's not the same. Not all nationalism is that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, America's built itself to this point because they believed that they were a people destined for greatness.
Right.
And certainly people were taking advantage of it, but like also many great things happened because of that. And we made a country that's founded on the idea that if you want to be an American, you don't need to be a certain type of person. You need to have a certain type of attitude, like a hardworking attitude. And that anybody can be an American and live the American dream. That's what the traditional American message is. So the idea of making America great, again, isn't intrinsically bad. The issue is looking at who's saying it and why they're saying it and what they actually mean. I mean, Reagan said "Make America Great Again" in a speech a long time ago, before any of this. And
right.
So I don't think the message itself is bad. I think that if people are using it as a way to mask, white supremacy, or using it as a way to push their own racist ideology or their own sort of modern manifest destiny, then it can become bad. But nationalism itself is necessary. Without nationalism, you can't have borders, and without borders, you won't have countries, and without countries, then there won't be any wealth, and everybody will be starving again, like they were not too long ago.
That's interesting. I just want to respond to someone said, don't make fun of people asking questions or coming with their ideas. And so I just said, sorry about that. I guess the reason the reason that I laughed is because when Potato said it's pretty much only white Europeans, it automatically made me think that they were using more of a racially biased argument. So I thought that was silly. But then I listened more, reading the further comments, and it seems that Potato has a further point that individualism is more of a Western thing, and other Eastern societies don't tend to.
But okay.
Well, let me finish. Value individualism as much. So I suppose the laughter wasn't called for, but it was more from a place of it's silly to get into racial bias. So maybe
I hate this critique of Western thought as if it's some obscure, minute portion of the world who believes Western thought. The entire world's introduced that is influenced by Western thought. The very the very clothing that businessmen in China wear is based on Western clothing. They're not wearing traditional Chinese clothing, for better or worse. I'm not saying that's good or bad, just the way it is. And so the whole Western idea of capitalism, which is a Western individualist idea, influences the whole world, and the whole world is run by it. So it's not easy enough to say that it's just something that originated in the West, which is true. It originated in the West, and most of the world doesn't practice it because the whole world's influenced by capitalism, and the countries that have decided to not be influenced by capitalism have chose to let their people starve to death, and millions of people have died. So it's not a question of whether the individualist mentality works. The question is, now that it's in place, because it is, how do we analyze it, and how do we treat it as a good thing or a bad thing? And personally, I think it's a good thing.
So Griswold Grimm says, if collective was so great, they wouldn't be migrating. Winky face. So he's kind of being funny, but making a point. Indoctrinate. He also says, indoctrinate their children's just like we do now. Then says, a strong individual is worth 3 strong collectivists. So there's an argument for individualism for you.
Cumshaw with the double negative. Racial bias doesn't not exist, even if we don't want it. The question is whether at least we try to correct it, since it's intrinsically unfair. Well, I mean, it's obvious that there's racist people out there. But I'll just speak for America. The thing is, and this is kind of like something Shapiro would say, which I'm not sure if I should be taking exactly what he'll be saying, but he'd say that, you're in a country where discriminating based on race is illegal. And if somebody does that and you have evidence of it, they will be arrested. So the whole idea of equaling it out and doing something more, like I need to now I need to go further and equate for past racial bias, isn't going to get us anywhere. And I mean, I feel like I'm just quoting Jordan Peterson here, but I mean, he has so much stuff on how equality of outcome and just trying to level the scales without letting them socially level themselves is just such a fallacy. I mean, I could go into that, but I feel like it's a whole different discussion that would take us somewhere else.
Yeah, we can go wherever you want to go. Really, this is just a wild ride, so we're all up for it. I love the comments. I love that this is generating a useful dialogue. We just got a stream of interesting ideas coming in right now. Clearly, Boy Meets Wart, who's one of our frequent listeners as well, says clearly we need both the individual and the collective, but the point is that one should not squash out the other. Yeah, and a lot of you know that I spent a week with Tim Freak recently, and he has this concept called unividualism, where you go from unconscious to you go from unconscious individual to conscious individual to conscious unividual, which he thinks he thinks that basically you have to first become an individual to then be a part of a proactively positive collective, rather than first and foremost being a part of your group identity and then becoming an individual. The first step is to become an individual and then decide where your group allegiance stands. That way we're doing it from this place of consciousness and mindfulness rather than from a place of automatic bias. And so I think that that's an interesting idea. I think if we, just to bear with me here to psychologize it a little bit, even though Kohlton doesn't like it when I do psychology, but one of the things that we could think about is from a personal transformation perspective, as far as thinking about how can I live the most authentic life possible? How can I live up to my potential? This is a very individualist question to be asking, and it's an important question to be asking. And if it was based on the collective, it wouldn't be so much about how can I transform my life? How can I live my purpose? And you see that in the caste system in India, historically speaking. In the caste system, you were subservient to your karmic role. So if you were a certain class, then that was the class that you were karmically born into by universal law, and that you had to fulfill it. And you just did that. You just fulfilled that job, and you didn't ask questions, and you didn't challenge authority, and you just showed up. And there was a lot of systems in China, in ancient China, like that as well. So the point is that there's clearly something about the West that says, okay, like, let's put all that aside and focus on what do you want as a person? How can you live your dream? And I'm not saying there's not value coming from these other countries, because I love India. When I look at all the yogic and the Vedic traditions, I'm blown away by the meditation techniques, by the self-inquiry that came out of that. And I've used some of those practices, and it's enriched my individual life tremendously. The problem for me is that I don't like it. I don't like this idea of just showing up to do something and not questioning it. I really like the idea of, what do I want? That's why I'm doing a YouTube channel. Yeah. Like in a traditional caste system, I would never be free to do that. So I just think that from a modern Western perspective, we can really, as individuals, think about what is true for us, and then how can we serve everybody else based on that. And
if you guys are all bearing with me with my assumption that capitalism is an individualistic system, which it is, then I'll go further to kind of go inside with your point that those old systems. It's not saying that those old systems didn't have value. I'm not saying they didn't work in their own niche and what they were doing, but let's look at the stats. After the rise of capitalism, there was some tremendous injustice going on with workers' rights in factories in the Industrial Revolution, which spurred Marx to write the Communist Manifesto and critiquing capitalism for a lot of things that no longer take place in most Western capitalist countries. And all that's happened since the Industrial Revolution is abundance of people. I think something like 80% of people have been lifted out of poverty. Like, whereas more people are living with food on the table and under a roof than ever before, and it's not even close. And this is not something that is just a coincidence. And it's like, okay, but maybe it's not a perfect system. It's not. And there are some good critiques of capitalism, but there isn't a better prose solution. And if you want to give me one, I'll listen. But if it's communism, I'll tell you you're wrong, because that's been tried, and it's been tried tons of times. And if you want to propose that we go back to monarchies, that's fine. If you're okay with living under subservient rule, and maybe we can even go back to the feudal system, and you can just live as a peasant for the rest of your life. But I kind of like the idea of being born and having the opportunity to be whatever I want. I mean, a black man was just elected president in a country where in the 1960s, they couldn't even eat the same diner as a white person. And that person was just elected president a mere 50 years later. I mean, this country affords people great opportunity. I mean, do you think Barack Obama thought when he was a kid that he could become president? Maybe not. Maybe he did, and that's why he did. But the thing is that he went from that point where people said, as a kid, he probably had to face a lot of adversity because of his race. And he got to the point where he could become president of the United States. That just proves that the American system, the capitalist system, works for individuals, regardless of these circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Kemshaw says, I think that's Peasants, question mark, the AI will take over in 15 years. What do you think of that?
Oh my God. Well, AI is something scary, man. I mean, I've heard Elon Musk talk about it. I've heard Sam Harris talk about it. I've heard a lot of people talk about it, and it's something to seriously be concerned about. Yeah, it's definitely, and unless we go through a global collapse before the next 15 years, some big changes are going to be coming, and it's going to be interesting to see if capitalism can survive when computers are doing all the jobs.
Yeah. I don't know. Excuse me if I'm mispronouncing your username. Sanji says it's a bit more complex. You can't put aside greed, power, depravity, stuff like that. Yeah, well, that is a good point. There is but the thing that I'm interested in, and this is why I study psychology. This is why I'm in grad school studying psychology, because I'm most interested in how we can live good lives as individuals, and that's why I tend to steer away from politics on this channel. But of course, graciously welcome Kohlton's opinions, because I think he's a critical thinker, and I do think that what the real problem is that individuals are fallible, right? And individuals have greed. Individuals take power inappropriately. And those individuals stack up in certain systems, no matter what the system is. That's my personal opinion. So I just feel what Peterson teaches about strengthening the individual being the answer to virtually most of our societal issues is a great answer. And I really agree with that. I think that the work that you do on yourself directly translates to the way you act in the world. In that if we have a culture of people who are self-reflecting and questioning their actions, like a lot of you great people listening right now, then we're going to have a better world to live in. And so I just feel that that is the ultimate solution. That's why I've pursued the career that I have. That being said, I think that other people's interests, passions, and solutions are equally valuable. And Griswold Grimm says, tell us more about what the algorithm has fed you about AI, smiley face. Wow. And then
people are really concerned about AI, man. And they have a lot of good reason to be.
Potato thinks it's fear mongering.
Well, I mean, I think Potato is.
It's so funny when you say, I think Potatoes. Potato's a great.
I think I've been taking glances at his comments, and one I wanted to respond to is race and ethnicity are biological realities that are tangible and real. Individual isn't really. Yeah, but there's no correlation between being a good person and race and ethnicity, and there's nothing saying. I mean, where are you going with that? Because let's say you can't. I mean, I think individualism is real because you're an individual and you're conscious, and so obviously it's reality. Biologically, you're an organism with cells. That's an individual organism. So how is that? There's nothing more intrinsically real than that.
Mm-hmm. Keep talking for
a
second.
Lot more. It's a lot more real than just having a different color skin, or just being from a different region. What you are as an individual person is so much more than that. And it's fine. I mean, if you want to think in a collectivist attitude and think that everybody's a certain way, I'm not saying you're saying this, but if you want to do this, and everybody's a certain way because of the way they look and because they're someone from a certain region, you can do that, but you'll see how far it gets you. And it's not going to lead you down a very good road.
Preach. Okay, so someone's asking if I've seen a video called Jordan Peterson Dismantled. It's worth a watch, even if you would disagree with it. Apparently, it's by someone called Resurrection Europa. Sanji says, lots of people don't care about a better world. They just want their piece of cake. They're just selfish, and they can take advantage they will take advantage of anyone. It always has been that way. These individuals are praised for that.
It's not actually valuable to yourself to just take advantage of people and just be some malevolent asshole that just takes advantage of people on the way to the top. It's not actually beneficial to you because people have reputations. And when you have a reputation of that, you're not going to be successful. And in some circumstances, people are. But to assume that just like every top-notch CEO capitalist is just taking advantage of a million people to get there and is just some scumbag, it's just not true. It's certainly they have a certain drive, but I mean, I don't think greed is what's behind capitalism. I think it's striving to better yourself, and I mean, obviously greed can get in the way, and there's greedy capitalists and there's bad people, but most of what's lifted people out of poverty in the worst parts of the world is philanthropy from the people with the most money in capitalist systems, from Bill Gates, from Oprah, from these people who have a lot of money. Philanthropy has done a lot better job than a lot of government systems ever could in providing wealth for people that are less than them, and tax redistribution. And I think that's something you have to consider. People intrinsically want to help people. It's only beneficial to help humanity if you're a part of humanity.
Yeah. This is so interesting. I just keep on wanting to bring it back to, because for me, I agree with you that if you're totally selfish, right? If you're a selfish person that only thinks about yourself, that never considers other people's needs, that's always out for your own, my opinion is that leads to a pretty miserable life, and that it leads to a lot of personal suffering. And I think that the cliche that if you don't feel good, go be of service to someone else is really true. I've just noticed for myself that the less I'm thinking about me, and the more I'm considering, okay, like how can I strengthen myself as an individual so that I can show up in a complicated world and maybe be useful to other people, the better I feel. Because I intrinsically want to be useful. When somebody comments on a YouTube video that I make and said this was useful, I feel good. When somebody says that, wow, you're being really selfish, and when my girlfriend and I get in an argument and I'm being a total dickhead, and I feel guilty after, because it doesn't, for me at least, it doesn't feel right. So I just think that a lot of individuals want to live more altruistic lives where they're being of service to something. Sorry, I just knocked something. Sorry if that was loud, everyone. Where they're being of service to something greater than themselves. And I think that that's what's meaningful. I think that's what leads to a good life, even if it's a little bit harder in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say that Jordan Peterson is doing more to destroy Western civilization than social justice warriors, when he's bringing people from both sides in, from both extremes in, to appreciate our society. So I don't know. I think Potato is kind of in a different realm than me right now, as far as his what he's thinking about. Like, I don't think we really have the same line of thinking. So I don't know how much.
I'm glad Potato's here though, because
I'm glad
a lot of ideas to wrestle with.
I wouldn't want it to just be a bunch of people just supporting whatever Peterson says, because that's not right.
Yes. Sonny says, are you able to unpack and discuss the Jungian psychology of how opposites attract, how opposites attract each other? How does this pattern play out in the world, society, and individuals? Great question. Okay, so just for some context, I actually my graduate specialization is in Jungian psychology. So I think that I could probably tackle some of that question for you. So opposites, Jung had this idea of compensation, where the polarized opposites, both in psychology and in the world, create a whole. And so if one side's out of balance, then you'll unconsciously compensate for the other side. So if you're intrinsically lacking in something, you might externally compensate. And let me just get to the last part of this question here while the comments are pouring in. Where the hell? Oh, there it is. How this pattern plays out in the world, society, and individuals. This is great. So yeah, so I think on a societal level, what we have, if you just take the spectrum of radical right to radical left, right? Like, you could view these as radical balancing compensations for each other. And Jung had this belief that everything typically is defined in terms of its opposite. We know what daytime is because there's nighttime. We know what we know what good is because we know what bad is. So you could just we know what hearing is because we know what silence is. So you could just take that and extrapolate it into virtually any topic, and you could see opposites playing out on each other. So these extremes, from a Jungian perspective, are expressing themselves as what he would call unconscious possessions of these archetypal compensations that are leading to this extremism, right? And then the work would be to become conscious, to become more aware of the tendency to to lean on one extreme or the other, and then what you'd have is this whole picture, this what he called the self, or the totality, which is really where the balance, where the truth typically lies, is the both end. And Tim Freak has been talking about this with me recently, called paralogical thinking, right? Because we tend to be one way or the other. But when you take a paralogical perspective, you're saying, no, it's not this way or that way. It's both of these things in this larger context. And that's why Ken Wilber's work is interesting to me, because he has this idea of holism, holons. So holarchies instead of hierarchies. Each level of the holarchy transcends and includes the next level. So if you look at any system of competent leadership, it's not that like the leader transcends and represses or oppresses the people under him. He transcends and includes them if he's a good leader. Just like he says, what is it? We went from single cell organisms to very complicated human beings. So each biological level transcends and includes the previous. I hope that kind of addresses your question. I feel like that could be unpacked for days. How does this, the next part is, how does this pattern play out in individuals? I think I covered that basically. I think you get the picture there. Go for it.
Yeah. Ditto.
Too abstract, as Kemshaw says. Yeah, this is why Kohlton doesn't like me talking about psychology. You know what? I need to work on, see a potato. I need to work on teaching it in a way that's really simple. I think that Jung was a very complicated thinker. Peterson's really good at putting Jung's teachings into simple terms. It's like, it would be like asking me to put neuroscience into simple terms, right? It's just difficult. So I'll work on that.
Well, I think that it's kind of a question with like, what direction do you want to go with, with regards to this channel as well? Like, what do you like? If it's about sorting myself out, so what does that mean? It means that you need to make things easy for people. And so what Peterson does is he uses Jungian psychology to build up a method that helps people sort themselves out. So maybe you can take influences from all over, including Jung, and kind of not necessarily say verbatim what he's saying, but use it as an influence to mold your thinking into influencing people to help them.
Yeah. So yeah, I think that one of the things, like you said, one of his strengths is he really puts it in terms that are very, very understandable for everybody. So that's a sign of a very experienced teacher. And the best teachers are really good at putting things in language that everyone can understand, or at least most person can understand. The part where he rejected the Holy Spirit was hard to get behind. Please elaborate on who you're talking about in the context. Psychologically, what is virtue? That is a interesting question. What is virtue psychologically? You want to tackle that one, Kohlton?
No, I don't. I think that there's a lot of value in these questions. I just don't know if I'm the person qualified to speak on them, honestly.
Well, I think one of the things about virtue, to elaborate just a little bit on that, is very simple in the way Peterson talks about. Well, what, like, if you could close your eyes and think about your highest potential, like, who is the person that you'd want to be if you could be that person, if it would be better for you, if it would be better for your family, if it would be better for your community. So it's complicated because it's true on multiple levels of analysis. That's one of the things that constitutes true, if you could look at it from multiple angles and see truth. So I would say, from a psychological perspective, virtue is what would be the highest potential that you could fulfill in any given moment on any given subject that would be holistically good for all domains that you could apply it to. Kemshaw says, to be specific, what concept of Jung could you implement into your life easily? I would say the concept of archetypes is the one that would be most easy to implement. So one of the things in psychology that we figured out that I think is basically widely accepted is this idea of subpersonalities. There are multiple motivating forces within each person that are driving our desires and our actions. And so in one moment, I might be in a sub-personality that wants a certain outcome on things, and then the next time might be in a totally different one. And you can see this with the fluidity of emotions and perspectives throughout the day. So let's say you're at work and you're really working hard on something. You might be in a totally different sub-personality. Then you get home, you see your wife and kids, and guess who turns on? You got a father inside of you. You've got a husband inside of you. So you get this whole new set of synaptic connections going on in your brain that's wiring you to a different outlook on life. And as a father, you're going to want different things for the world than you will as a worker. So we're always in these different perspectives. So what I would say to implement Jung's thinking on archetypes is understand that the forces that are driving us are very complicated and multifaceted. And if you can see when you're kind of possessed by a certain force inside of you, you can start to be aware of it and look at your life from that perspective and say, how am I managing all these different drives? Am I doing an okay job compromising with them? Is some of them getting too much control? Those are all good questions to be asking.
Yeah, I think that that's a good place to leave it, honestly.
We've been going for a while.
Yeah, I think that's...
He just wants to go because I started talking about psychology. At the very beginning, he said, I'm not talking about psychology with you. I'm not going to do it. I don't feel competent in this area. It makes me feel like I'm out of my wheelhouse. And now he wants to leave. So there you have it.
Well, I actually totally I have to get to dinner, but
you have to. I thought you ate dinner already. You told me you ate already. Yeah, I don't believe it. I don't believe it. This is bullshit.
That was my first dinner. That was my first dinner. So
you're so funny.
I'm actually telling the truth, which is why this is ironic. No, it's just a coincidence, and I also don't want to talk about psychology with you, and I have to eat dinner.
Man. All right, we're gonna we'll have you back on soon for Hostile Brothers Part 2. I'm tempted to hold you captive and just keep you.
This was a pretty non-hostile conversation.
Oh no, it's getting heated right now. I'm pissed.
Yeah, I was angry this whole time.
No, you're a great guest, Kohlton. Thank you so much for your time and your opinions, and we appreciate it. And thank you all listeners for being so engaging. I love your comments. It's just an amazing conversation that we were able to generate. Last question, Kohlton. What was your favorite part about the Crusades?
Okay. I really enjoy, I guess it's kind of a hard question. So I really enjoy the Third
All
Crusade.
The murder?
Yeah. That's kind of a hard answer. Specifically following the interactions between Sultan Saladin and King Richard the Lionheart is a really, really cool part of the Crusades, and I would write a dissertation on it if I could.
Okay, now I will answer my last question. Bring up something from your childhood. Well, one time Kohlton threw scissors at me. He threw scissors
so much.
at me. But he was very young. He was really young, so we can't be too hard on him. And to be fair, I was very antagonistic, and I don't blame him for throwing scissors at me. But I was terrified. Getting scissors thrown at you is a scary thing. He was a very tenacious little fella, and I'm glad we're both still alive to have this conversation. So,
what a way to end the podcast. By the way, this guy I've been talking with is like a psychopath.
No, he's not. He was a little kid.
Now I have to bring up something fucked up. Now I have to say something fucked up that you did.
Fine.
But I'm not gonna.
No, just do it.
I'm not gonna.
Just do it. If it's gonna make you feel better, do it.
That's where that leads.
No, just do it.
I
don't make you feel better.
No, it doesn't.
You were a little kid.
It won't. I'm just saying.
I'm sorry, Kohlton. If I crossed any boundaries, I apologize.
Yeah, and you're still a little kid, so.
Just get it all out. I don't want you to be resentful at me later. So anything you have to attack me with to feel better, just do it. Get it over with. Because I don't want to fight later.
I got a dinner to get to.
All right, see you, bro.
But really good connecting with you.
Sour note to end it on. See you, everybody.